The Business of Biotech is produced by Life Science Connect and its community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for biopharma decision makers. If you're working on biologics process development and manufacturing challenges, you need to swing by bioprocessonline.com. If you're trying to stay ahead of the cell or gene therapy curve, visit cellandgene.com. When it's time to map out your clinical course, let clinicalleader.com help. And if optimizing outsourcing decisions is what you're after, check out outsourcepharma.com. We're Life Science Connect, and we're here to help.
Mission-driven venture capital has quickly become an innovative financial incubation arena for biotech startups in multiple indications, but perhaps none as bustling as cognitive disorders. More than 55 million people globally are afflicted with dementia, and that figure is expected to nearly double over the next 20 years and continue to at least double every 20 years thereafter. It's a huge unmet medical need, and the biotech industry is responding. Many projections for the dementia therapeutics market soar past $30 billion by 2030. Dementia-specific venture firms, with their deep understanding of the science and markets, are proving a key player in this landscape. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and my guest on today's show is a venture veteran who, for the past several years, has been fully committed to the mission-driven venture model in a space that's ripe for biotech innovation. Dr. Jonathan Behr made his foray into venture philanthropy as the first managing director of the JDRF T1D fund. Astute listeners might recall that Katie Elliott, the current managing director at the JDRF T1D fund, was my guest on episode 80 of the podcast. But in 2019, John became a partner at the Dementia Discovery Fund, the world's largest family of specialized venture capital funds that invest exclusively in companies developing or enabling novel therapeutics for dementia. John's venture creation chops are solid. He was previously a principal at PureTech Ventures and vice president of new ventures for Enlight Biosciences. And he's co-founded and served on the boards of dozens of biotechs. But John's not just another VC in a nice jacket. With an MIT PhD in biological engineering to his credit, he's advantaged by a pretty comprehensive understanding of what's going on in the lab. And I'm thrilled for the opportunity to talk with him today. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to speak with you today.
The pleasure is all mine. And I want to get started with a little background on John. As I mentioned, you've got some pretty solid science chops. And I want to kind of start there before we get into the DDF story. You have a PhD in biological engineering from MIT. But if I look at your sort of career trajectory, research seems like it was sort of a brief stop on that trajectory. So I'm curious about the genesis of your interest in the business side of biotech.
Yeah, no, happy to explain. And I think once you add together undergrad and graduate research, the stop certainly didn't feel so brief. But I think my entree into venture capital was certainly serendipitous, but I think I was always interested in translation. So I had originally actually enrolled in undergrad as a physics major, realized nobody had discovered anything really new in decades, if not centuries, right, in physics, and that the cutting edge of science, a lot of it was biotechnology. And so got really excited about the field and the space and the opportunity to learn new things. Enrolled at MIT in the biological engineering PhD program because of the broader ecosystem that I would be exposed to, and the knowledge that MIT was an entrepreneurial institution. The faculty members I was working with were translationally minded, and there'd be an opportunity to have an impact beyond basic research. And so I was thinking about what my next steps would be, and I had the opportunity to consult to a venture firm, consult to PureTech on due diligence for various new projects while I was finishing my PhD, and really began to understand the opportunity that presented to have a portfolio of projects and potential investments and new companies that I could be involved in that would be both intellectually exciting because of the diversity, but also an opportunity to have a broader impact than if I had spent my career focused on one individual, more academic project. So it's really exciting to me from that perspective, and transitioned immediately when I, after I defended my thesis into a venture creation career.
What did you have to do from a learning standpoint at that point in your career to embrace the venture side of the business?
So it's certainly very different than just being a scientist, and I had the self-awareness to know that I was interested in other translational paths. And so while I was at MIT, I did coursework at the Sloan School of Business, and participated in activities outside the classroom that were business related. And I think when we're interviewing potential new hires, the first real questions we ask are around the person's vocabulary and commitment to translation. We want to know if somebody's running towards company creation, running towards venture capital, running towards translation, or whether they're running away from the bench. And so for me personally, having understood for some time that I was interested in other paths, and taking the time to learn the fundamentals, right, of corporate finance or entrepreneurship, or the business or law behind biotechnology, was really important, so that I had that foundation to learn more quickly once I got into the business side full time. And venture is, as I mentioned, I think it's a portfolio business, right? It's you need to learn quickly and gain knowledge in many different spaces, right? And you're never going to be the world's expert at any individual thing, but you need to be able to work with the world's experts in those spaces to not only identify the best investments, but then also to be a good board member and a good investor, and to be able to add value and help guide those companies to be successable.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, running toward venture or running away from the bench. And this is a total aside, but I'm curious about your perspective on. I've had numbers of conversations with former research experts who work their way into various aspects of the biotech business. If someone is seeking to run away from the bench, many of these conversations kind of start there, right? Like, I just couldn't see myself spending another week, month, year in the lab. What are some of the other alternatives that you might suggest to folks who, maybe aren't running towards venture, but feel the need to run away from the bench?
That's a really good question. And I think it is certainly career stage dependent, right? I think if you are very early career, I certainly think consulting is still a good opportunity to learn about biotechnology more broadly, the business of biotech and pharma. I think most people don't even understand what career opportunities are out there if they've come through an academic trajectory, right? Nobody's applying to college when they're 16, 17 saying, I want to be a venture capitalist, right? Unless you happen to have somebody in the family, you probably don't even know that job exists, right? I mean, you're just a few years past saying, I want to be a fireman. So, I think consulting is certainly an opportunity, but I think really practical experience broadly and just understanding what's out there is really important. I think many universities have very good biotechnology clubs, right? Or other sort of extracurricular venues where you can get exposure to what other jobs exist, whether it be, corporate strategy or business development or search and evaluation or venture capital or, public stock analyst analysis or management consulting, right? There's so many jobs that it's hard to understand unless you've had some practical exposure to them. So I think getting practical exposure is really helpful if you can do that, as an intern or through some other avenue.
Yeah. The other thing, excuse me, about your history so far that strikes me is just how willingly you've embraced so many different modalities and therapeutic areas. For instance, you worked on imaging and ultrasound technologies. You worked on small molecules, large molecules. I'll drop another name. Vedanta's Bernat Ollier has been a multiple-time guest on the show. You were a co-founder of Enlight Biosciences that Bernat heads up. You mentioned earlier Lisa Deschamps at Aviato Biosciences. This is another one of your startups. What do you think, like at this stage in your career as a venture capitalist, what do you consider sort of the advantage of that breadth of experience that you've embraced, like I said, as opposed to being a specialist? Because I talk to plenty of people who are specialists too. They plug into a specific indication or a specific therapeutic area and stay there for a long, long time.
I think that's an excellent question. And in some ways, the questions boil down to what does it take to make a good investment, right? And I think I am a specialist, right? Just not in any of those specific categories that you mentioned, right? I'm not a specialist by modality or I have at times been a specialist in different therapeutic areas, right? Or different areas of science. And I think, most venture investors will rattle off very similar criteria of what they look for in a good company. One is certainly a management team that you can believe in and a solid development plan. And I think that takes repetition, right? And there's some pattern recognition. And it's not just the deals you do, it's the deals you see and that you don't do. And having the longevity in a role to see which of those succeed and fail and why. It's also working with other really great people in various roles that you can learn from. So I do think I benefited to a certain extent from having had the opportunity to move between various managers, right? And roles where I could learn from different people and learn different experiences. But at this point, certainly for SV and for the Dementia Discovery Fund, I do think that I have some specialization in early stage investing, right? Company creation, company building, seed stage investing, Series A investing, younger, smaller companies that still need to build capabilities, build data packages, and have very different problems or challenges, I should say, than companies that at later stages of development have specialty in several therapeutic areas, but more importantly, perhaps behind that, certain areas of biology, certain mechanisms, some of which overlap between type 1 diabetes and dementia, for example. But at the end of the day, I think reflecting on the podcast you did with Katie, or even the podcast you did with ADDF, I think many venture investors, right, what we look for is we're looking for problems to solve, right? We're looking for ways you can make impact because that's how you get rewarded. At DDF, we believe that the financial returns correlate with impact. So we're seeking to make impact first. And so I do think that being able to identify those types of problems and opportunities is also something that is an important skill when you're doing early stage investing.
Yeah. I mentioned that you got your start, I'm assuming. Was that your first foray into venture philanthropy from 2016 to 2019, I think, when you were at JDRF T1D fund?
So it was my first foray into venture philanthropy, but I use that term more narrowly than perhaps you do. So for me, venture philanthropy implies a charitable purpose above other purposes. And JDRF and the T1D fund are explicitly a not-for-profit. ADDF is a not-for-profit. And the models there are to recycle capital towards the mission.
Okay.
I think an important differentiator between that and the Dementia Discovery Fund is the Dementia Discovery Fund is actually a for-profit venture fund that's structured quite similarly to any other non-strategic venture fund. But the DDF was created for impact. And many of our limited partners are focused on impact. And so we have two sets of criteria that we need to satisfy. We need to satisfy our impact criteria, but then we also need to satisfy the financial return criteria. And we return capital back to our limited partners who can choose to reinvest in the DDF or reinvest in other mission-related activities, or they can choose to reinvest that capital elsewhere. So we are, so we don't call ourselves a venture philanthropy fund per se. So if you ask the question you asked me a little differently, was the JDRF T1D fund my first exposure to venture philanthropy? I'd say yes, but it wasn't my first exposure to strategic investing, right? Or impact-focused investing. So really, even going back to PureTech, you mentioned Enlight Biosciences is one of my experiences. Enlight was an affiliated investment vehicle created by PureTech, where all the limited partners were pharmaceutical companies. So Merck, Pfizer, Lilly, Johnson & Johnson, Abbott, AstraZeneca, I believe, were all limited partner equivalents at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And the mandate there was to invest in enabling technologies that could support drug discovery and development for any or all of those limited partners who wanted to enjoy the benefits of the technologies that were developed by that vehicle. So my entire career, I've been looking at more narrowly focused investment theses and mandates where you're trying to accomplish a goal and solve a specific problem or set of problems, as opposed to having the entire universe to focus on.
Yeah. Was it Enlight focused on a specific indication or a specific sort of grouping of indications, or was that more broad?
So Enlight was really focused on technology spaces. So enabling tools and technologies. So new discovery platforms, chemistry platforms, drug delivery platforms. So worked on a drug delivery company called Intrega, which was trying to deliver macromolecules and biologics orally, which is a really exciting company. Then I moved to Partners Healthcare Innovation, which is now Mass General Brigham Innovation. And there I was focused on neuroscience, on different clinical groups in the hospitals that were generating innovation in neuroscience and creating companies there and focusing on licensing and business development around higher value opportunities. So again, a constrained opportunity set where we were looking to maximize impact and benefit, and then move to the T1D fund and then SV in 2019.